Welcome everybody to the 2018, nope, I'm sorry, how that even got in there, I apologize. The 2021 request for grant application for the Alaska Adult Education. This is an overview. I won't go into great detail in some of the areas, but I will go over an overview of the grant request in this meeting. So first of all, let me start off by talking about the project timeline. First, this is a competitive grant, so it is open competitively around the state. This year, we've opened it up to a 4-year grant period from July 1, 2021 through June 30th of 2025. The RGA funding is for the first, it covers the first grant year of July 1, 2021 through June 30th of 2022. Thereafter, each year is a renewal year. It's contingent on the grantee's ability to successfully implement the grant terms, meet performance expectations, and provide regional adult education and literacy activities. And those are all outlined within the RGA. And grantees must submit a renewal package every year, usually around June and July timeframe when grant funding is released. All grant awards are subject to availability of funds from the federal government and legislative appropriations, so just be aware of that. Moving forward, initial review process. It's important that you know the initial review process because there are two things that come before we can even look at your grant and send it off to the review panel. First of all, you have to be an eligible provider. And then second, you must demonstrate past effectiveness in order for us to review the grant further. If you do not meet one, or sorry, if you do not meet both of these, number 1 and number 2, we can't review your grant. So the first question, does the applicant meet the definition of eligible provider? And I'll go over that in just a second. And the second one, has the applicant successfully demonstrated past effectiveness by providing performance data? If you look in your grant RGA, you have to fill out the demonstrated effectiveness. It's Appendix B. There's Table A for previously funded individuals and Table B for if you have not been previously funded under the AFLA grant or Title II of the Adult Education and Literacy Act, so AFLA. And if you do not meet these two qualifications, again, we will not go any further in that grant review process. Eligible providers meet one of the following criteria: local education agency, community-based organization, or faith-based organization, volunteer literacy, institute of higher education, public or private nonprofit agency, library, public housing, nonprofit institute, as described in A through G, that provides adult education and literacy to eligible individuals. Or you can be a consortium of more than one of the institutes. You can work together to provide literacy activities. And there's also a partnership with employers and entities described in these paragraphs. So there's a multitude of different ways to be an eligible provider. From there, the demonstrated effectiveness, and apparently I missed that when I went through and made these do their little fly-ins. You have to demonstrate effectiveness in reading, writing, math, and English as a second language. You have to demonstrate effectiveness in employment, attaining a secondary school diploma or its recognized equivalent, and transition to post-secondary education and training. For that data, we need to see again on Table 1A for individuals who have been previously funded under WIOA Title II, or Table 1B if you have not been previously funded. And if you are a consortium, if you're going in with more than one agency, you each have to provide that information on your own records. So say you are a library and you're a consortium with a nonprofit entity, you have to demonstrate effectiveness as the library and as the nonprofit. We need that information twice. Data must reflect program years, PY18 and PY19, which is July 1st of 2018 through June 30th of 2019, and July 1 of 2019 through June 30th of 2020. From there, if we have those two things in place, we can move on to the rest of the application and move it on to review. There's some important deadlines that you should be aware of. These are in the RGA as well. You guys found the first teleconference, so that is today. We have another one on grant submission and the overview for that on February 18th. I won't be touching on that today. Any RGA inquiry questions are due to this office by March 1st, and we will provide the answers in writing on March 5th to our AAE grant resources website. It will be posted there. Regional grant applications are submitted by April 15th at 5 p.m. Any applications that come in after this date, we will not be able to review them. We will notify you of eligibility status based on your demonstrated effectiveness and eligible, whether you're an eligible provider by April 23rd. And from there, there is a section of our RGA that gets reviewed by the AWIB board, the Alaska Workforce Investment Board. And those sections go to them April 26th through the 5th of May. They review those and they make their comments and recommendations, and those comments and recommendations get compiled and sent with your grant applications over to the review members to evaluate with their final scores, which will be evaluated May 10th through the 21st. After that, the grant recommendations will be forwarded on to the Department of Labor Commissioner for her final review and approval, starting on May 28th. The notice of intent to award and the notice of denials will go out June 11th with a 10-day appeal period. And the final grant award notifications will go out June 25th. So it's important to know that there are 3 sections of our grant. We do award 3 different grants under this RGA. The first one is adult literacy, adult education and literacy. Alaska programs under the adult education and literacy are required to provide adult education, English language acquisition activities, literacy, and workplace adult education and literacy activities. You may also provide or offer the following additional activities: family literacy, integrated English literacy and civics education, workplace prep activities, and integrated education and training. All of these are defined in your RGA beginning in Appendix I, which is your definitions. And you can find more on WIOA section 231, where they break these down. The next one is corrections. Corrections individuals have to provide adult education and literacy activities, special education as defined by the eligible agency, secondary school credit, in our state that is GED, integrated education and training, career pathways, concurrent employment, peer tutoring, and transition to reentry individuals. There is post-release services with the goal of reducing recidivism. And so that is important to note if you're applying for the corrections grant. And then the last one is the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education, or our IELCE grant. In order to go provide this service, you have to have instruction in literacy and English language acquisition, instruction on the rights and responsibility of citizenship, civic participation, integrated education and training, or IET activities, and the grantee must design a program to prepare adults who are ELL or English language learners for unsubsidized employment in in-demand industries, occupations that lead to economic self-sufficiency. They also have to integrate with the local workforce development system in order to carry these activities out. So it's important to note these when you go to write these grants. The AAE has established regions. There are 13 regions within the state, and we have them listed here. They are also listed in the RGA. We have 2 additional grants, as we've just stated. One of them is the IELCE, or the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education, and the other one is the Department of Corrections Institutional Centers, and that grant covers all the institutional correctional centers within the state. Grant requirements. Please understand the difference between the grant requirements of adult education, IELCE, and corrections. I've listed the page numbers on where you can find these differences in your grant package. You must write to one. If you're going to write a separate grant, it needs to be a separate narrative. So please do not combine them as adult education, corrections, and IELCE. If you're going to apply for all 3, it has to be 3 separate narratives. There are priority of services that must be addressed in each of those grants. And again, they are addressed on each of these pages within the different within the different adult education, IELCE, and corrections grant requirements. Co-enrollment is a grant requirement, as well as academic programs for corrections and IELCE. For evaluation and scoring, please note that we have a review panel that consists of a subject matter expert in adult education, individuals that are experienced in implementing state grants, or individuals knowledgeable in adult education in a variety of different organizations that review our grants and then make their determinations in scoring. The evaluation criteria in scoring is based on the grant narrative and how they address the 13 considerations, the budget narrative, formatting, grammar, and there are some additional points available there's 2 different ones that align with the WIOA narrative, or plan, I'm sorry, state plan. The scoring breaks down from a value of 0 to 3 on your rubrics. You will find those scoring guides. An absent or 0 points is information that is not present. It's absent from your narrative. If it's limited information, it is a 1. Acceptable information will be a 2, and excellent information will be a 3. In order to be awarded an AFLA grant or from adult education, you must score at least a 60% or higher. Adult education grants have a maximum score of 189 and a minimum score of 113. Corrections, adult education, and other institutionalized grants have a maximum score of 195 and a minimum score of 117. And IELCE grants have a maximum score of 201 with a minimum score of 120. There is a cover page that is required. There is a maximum score of 3 points for the cover page. Contact information, including applicant name and agency, needs to be on that cover page. the region of the grant that you wish to administer, the type of organization, again, see that eligible provider for your definition, your DUNS number, and the program area of capacity to address with that grant funding. So is it adult education, corrections, or IELCE? The grant narrative is a requirement. The first part of that is the plan for adult education service delivery. There's a maximum of 12 points. There needs to be an in-depth overview of your experience in serving adults, including your adult education and literacy activities, an outline for the proposed grant activities, the manner in which you plan to implement them, your organizational goals, the need in the community, and how you plan to address that need. After that, you have your WIOA 13 considerations. All topics must be addressed and tables completed for you to obtain the points in that section. The narrative should be clearly identified in each section. And funding under IELC and corrections must complete the 13 considerations and additional statements as indicated within their considerations. Please note that the 13 considerations have different point value. And as you can see on number 2, serving individuals with barriers, there is 1 point. The max point is for adult education grants or all grants. And then if there is additional points for such things as corrections, it will say after that. Regional needs statement, serving individuals with barriers, including disabilities, past effectiveness, alignment with one-stop partners, intensity, duration, and flexibility, flexible scheduling, evidence-based instructional practices in reading instruction, effective use of technology and distance learning, facilitate learning in context, qualified instructors and staff, partnership and support services for development of career pathways, learner support services, high quality information and data collection systems, and English language acquisition and civics education activities. Each one of these must be addressed in your narrative, and there is points available for each one of those. There are some additional considerations. The first one is innovation in adult education practices and how you plan to support these innovative ideas. And then the second one would be the IET. How would you provide the integrated education and training services within the community? IELCE is required to write this in their narrative, so they would not be available to get extra points on this. The AAE and the corrections are not required to write this, so there is some extra points there for those ones. A budget narrative is also required. There is max 9 points for the budget narrative. Programs may use current funding levels to estimate their budgets. For those not funded under AFLA, provide a budget that's reasonable and practical when estimating your budget. There is also an accompanied project budget form 165 that needs to go with that. You can find that on the funding release or on our website as well. And the narrative must include a summary of cost by line item. So personnel services, travel, contractual supplies, and equipment. You can find those definitions in your RGA. Be aware that there's some fiscal requirements. If you are using an indirect cost rate, we are a supplement, not supplant grant, and we are under a restricted indirect rate. If you are approved for an indirect rate, but not a restricted indirect rate, the max you can use is 8%. And What's supplement, not supplant means is that we support, not replace, other state or local public funds expended on adult education and literacy activities. So if you already have funds in place for adult education and literacy activities, we do not replace those funds. We are there to support them. So please be aware of that while writing this grant. It's important to note that there is a difference between direct instructional versus admin rate when it comes to looking at our grant. The admin rate is federally capped at 5% of this rate of this grant, unless it is too restrictive, and then it can be negotiated with the adult ed office to determine an adequate level of funding for non-instructional purposes. But the direct instructional cost encompasses 95% of the grant award, and that is directly related to teaching students. So please be aware of that. Program income is also written into our grant, and it is allowable, and you have the ability to charge a program fee for tuition, books, and other fees for participating in AAE services. Fees collected must follow uniform guidance principles, and expenditures can't be used outside of adult education. You have to establish policies to collect fees, and it cannot be a barrier for students that are participating in your program. You must provide staffing. It's an essential part of this grant, and you must have the staffing and/or volunteers to fulfill your essential job duties and meet the grant requirements. Job descriptions must accompany the grant narrative. And if you have not been previously funded by an AFLA grant, resumes are also required. Just note that applications may be rejected if there's signatures missing that are required. The formats for the RGA the format is not used. There's changes to the terms or conditions of this RGA that is noted. There's a conflict of interest. When we receive the grant after closure period, again, it's due April 15th at 5 p.m. If you are on the debarred or suspended list by the state, or you fail to demonstrate effectiveness, your application may be rejected. That's the basic overview of the grant. I know that I did not get into the 13 considerations in depth. I'm sure there's some questions, but I will open it up for questions now.
Hi, Wendy. This is Pamela.
Hi, Pamela.
How are you today?
Good.
I just wanted to, I'm pretty sure I know the answer is yes, but I just wanted to verify that the narrative, let me go to that page. I'm sorry. The narrative is the 25 pages, which includes the plan for adult education service delivery through the WIOA 13 considerations. And then in addition to the 25 pages, you also have the budget narrative, or is that budget narrative included in the 25 pages?
No, that's a really good question. The narrative itself is 25 pages, and you have 25 pages to explain all of the 13 considerations, as well as the plan for adult education service delivery. Yes, ma'am. And then the budget narrative is in addition to, so it does not count as part of the 25 questions or 25 pages, nor does the additional documentation count as part of that 25 pages. Or the cover page. Your cover page does not count. So the 25 pages is part of it, is just the narrative. Yes.
Thank you.
two things, Wendy. Hi. I had a question also on that. So tables are not part of that. That's considered additional. Is that
Tables
correct?
are considered additional. We did not put that as part of the narrative so that you would have the space to explain what you needed to explain.
Okay. And then I was just curious about the program year 2019, which is also fiscal year 2020, and just you know, since COVID was happening during that time, our numbers are depressed, and I was just wondering about that when I reflect back on that this past program year, right? So, yeah. Are we able to make a footnote about that or have some?
No, it doesn't have to be made a footnote of it as far as that's concerned. The individuals who are looking at the demonstrated effectiveness are well aware that COVID happened last year. And so the numbers may reflect that. And we also have the ability to pull up the state reports and compare them to state reports. And so, excuse me, if we see a significant outlier, I mean, that might be a cause for concern, but for the most part, we see that they do align with what we are seeing in our reporting or what we see in our numbers. So we understand that there was a pandemic.
So to build upon that, Wendy, when we're writing the report, do we, or our grant, I'm sorry, when we're completing our grant, do we proceed as if COVID didn't happen? Or do we address the issue of COVID, that if COVID is still continuing on, that things are going to be different than what we would like them to be? Do we acknowledge that somewhere, or do we just plan as if COVID isn't happening?
So the way that the grant should be written is, if COVID were to end tomorrow, how would you run your grant? We should not be taking into account COVID. We understand that there's going to be some differences in service due to COVID. However, we can't rely on that forever, or maybe we can, we just don't know yet, but we need to see how the program would run in the normal day-to-day operations.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, Wendy, I have a question about the tables. So I understand table, the 1A, 1B, depending on how you were funded or if you weren't funded. And then I'm looking at table 2, and I'm a little bit confused on the section that says transition outcomes, and it has sections for employment, post-secondary education, and training.
So these are their differences. There could be, sorry, I apologize. You could use the same numbers in some of these tables. The difference is the demonstrated effectiveness is not part of your grant application. The people that review your application will not see your demonstrated effectiveness. They will see your past effectiveness.
Okay.
There's the difference. Does that make sense?
Yes, and then to clarify, because I was trying to pull this from table 5, and it includes post-secondary education and training together. And so I don't know how to split those apart. If that makes sense.
I'm going to make a note of that, Jackie,
Okay.
and then I need to look at table 5.
Okay, but thank you. That makes sense about what the reviewers can see. That answered part of it. Thank you.
Yeah, your demonstrated effectiveness is your key into the house. And the only people that see that are myself and Donna to make sure that that data is there and that it is, you are demonstrating effectiveness in serving adults with adults in education. But that does not go to the reviewers. Your past effectiveness does, and it is reviewed by the reviewers.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
So just to reiterate, the table 2 past effectiveness goes to the reviewers, but the 1A/1B does not.
It does
Correct.
not. It is not part of the, it is there, it is reviewed, and it is a yes, no question. If you look on your rubric on the very first page, it is answered by myself and Donna as a yes, no, whether you move on or not. Any other questions?
Is the PowerPoint available for everybody?
The PowerPoint, it'll be a recording, Ruth, and then I will be on the adult ed grant resources page.
Okay.
I will get that posted. But the PowerPoint was taken right off of the RGA, but yeah, that will be out there for everybody.
Thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions?
I have an additional question
Yes,
about
ma'am.
the needs assessment. Normally, when I've done it in the past, I've used data from a variety of sources. Does the needs assessment, is that the way you're focusing on a needs assessment to work as far as pulling data that's regionally important and locally applicable?
Are you talking about the resources?
The information, instead of it being me generating that data, I would be getting it from sources, right? The needs assessment. By looking at a variety of different sources and kind of coming up with the needs for the local area. So it's not like I'm generating a needs assessment from my own questions to the community, like a large scale survey. I mean, it could be, but that's, yeah, that's my question.
I'm curious. I guess I don't understand the question, Linda.
Okay, so I'm using a variety of different demographics and information that's out there already for the needs assessment. And so that's my plan on how it would work. And I just wanted to make sure that that is the correct reading of that.
Are you looking at the table itself?
No, I was just looking at some of the needs that are just general in the narrative.
So on page 36, that has the appendix C, the grantor was so very kind to list resources that you could click on to take you directly to resources to get that information.
But you're talking about the narrative itself?
No, she's asking where to get the data, where to gather it
I
from.
was actually asking if that's how you want it to be. You want the analysis to be from those
It does
things.
not have to come from those resources. It could come from other areas. It just needs to fit within that that table.
Okay, good. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess I had one additional question, and the labor analysis is different from the needs assessment? Or is it, it's kind of together? Or is it?
The
completely-
labor analysis is actually, the needs assessment is it's kind of together, but one is a table and one is the narrative part of it.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions? Okay, hearing no other questions, I encourage you to go to our jobs.alaska.gov/AAE website. There is a tab on the right-hand side that says Grant Resources. You'll be able to find the recording there, and any questions that you have, if you send them to ak.adult.ed@alaska.gov with the title, questions, we can then put them together into a resource for you guys to have those questions and answers. RGA questions is the tagline, please, in the subject heading. That way we can compile them. We can give them think them through and give them the appropriate answer to those. We will get this recording out there so that you can review it again if you would so desired, or send it on to anybody else that needs to review it. If you would like, we have the second of these series next week on the 18th at 10 a.m. and we'll be talking about how to submit your grant from there. Hearing no final questions, I really appreciate your time and wish you great afternoon and rest of the week.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Wendy.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Wendy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.